the belief by some quite extreme Euro fanatics, as it were, inside the European Commission, that any success by Britain would undermine the European project. That would undermine the European single market and so on. Now, that's why we designed Canada Plus, because they'd already struck those deals with all these other countries. So if they'd struck it with Canada and they struck it with Korea, how can it undermine the single market? Mercantilism, protectionism, if you like, on the part of the French mostly, but French, Germans, and many other European countries too, but primarily the French. The French operate under a mythology that Britain is a sort of wild west of deregulation. I mean, you talk to any small business in this country, they think you're mad for saying that. But that's what the French seem to believe. Now, this is nonsense. Our safety levels at work are better than anywhere else in Europe and have been for our entire membership. No country competes with us. Our holidays are better. You name it. There's a whole series of things which are better in Britain. So basically, this is a terrifying. It goes to the point that the French, in particular, but others, are terrified that somehow we're going to be more competitive than them. Actually, the truth is we are, but they won't be able to stop it. Because we're an 85% services economy. We're going to win on intellectual property. We're going to win on our skills. We're going to win on being the best country in the world at genetics, or the best country in the world at artificial intelligence, or the best country in the world at the software behind self-driving cars. You name it. They won't be able to stop us doing that. But they have a very old-fashioned, mercantilist, heavy industry approach to the world that says, oh, if you don't have enough regulations, they'll defeat us. We will win our way in the world without that. Well, I mean, truth be told, Boris and I discussed this as we went through it, and Boris was, I mean, to be fair to him, the reason I supported him in the leadership contest was because he was supportive of everything I said through the way. So first off, don't let them determine the timetable, because if you do, they'll do the bits that they care about first and the bits you care about last, if ever, right? That's the first thing. Second thing is lay on the table what you want. Don't be afraid of saying, this is the trade deal we want. Why? Because what we want is actually attractive to many European countries. Because what we're saying is maximizing the trade between us, and trade between two countries is good for both. And the Germans actually don't want to lose access to the British market for their car industry. They call us Treasure Island, because cars sold here are so profitable for them, so they don't want to lose that. So lay out in clear terms what you're after and why you think it's good for both sides. Thirdly, use the other things that people don't talk about. One of the mistakes that Theresa made was to say to the Europeans, whatever you do, we won't stop dealing with you on the military front, on the security front and so on. Well, actually, that's massively to their advantage. If they really are going to be to go in for sort of economic warfare against us, which is almost what some people are talking about. I don't think it'll ever happen, but the sort of terms of it, then we should be saying to them, okay, fine. Then we will be a complete third country, and we'll deal with you as a third country. So there's that leverage too. So a whole series of bits of leverage there. The other thing to say is the withdrawal agreement was put together and agreed to by us on the presumption that we would go forward to a free trade agreement on a Canada-style model. I think the change of stance by the European Union on this is not acting in good faith. And so if they insist on this hardline approach, at the end of it, we should go back and say, well, actually, the withdrawal agreement doesn't necessarily stand under those circumstances, and we'll repudiate some of it. And so maybe a bit of the money, or maybe some other elements of it. We'll look after the European citizens. We're not an uncivilized country. We'll expect them to look after our citizens. But, use every weapon you have in the negotiating armory, and don't be namby-pamby about it. Say, look, this is our national interest we're dealing with here. This is our future we're dealing with here. This is the democratic will of the people, which bluntly, I think, doesn't just trump politicians' views here, it trumps their views too. Because remember, the European Commission is not a democratic institution. It's a bureaucratic institution. And so if you say to them, sorry, your views matter less than British people's views. But at the end of the day, you come back to the base of it. And the other reason I supported Boris, the leadership, was because he sees that this is about grasping an opportunity. And so the other thing he should do is grasp those opportunities while we're talking to Europeans. So look for a deal with Japan. Look for a deal with TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Look for a deal with the Americans. Look for a deal with the Australians and strike those deals. What that does is it turns the language of this negotiation from what it was under Theresa May's government, which is, we must minimise any damage done to this, to we must maximise the gains from this. What Theresa had was, if you like, not her personally particularly, but the people, her team, was a Remainers' view of what Brexit should be about. What we now want is a Brexiteers' view of what Brexit should be about. And a Brexiteers' view is this is an opportunity to be grasped. Brexit's not the answer, but it's certainly a very good question to start with. You can oversimplify what happened to Theresa May's government. I mean, in many ways, I think she was a very good Prime Minister, but when she didn't win that election, and that was, I'm afraid that was her fault. You can't avoid that. When she didn't win it and she lost her two main supporters, Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill, inside Number 10, Number 10 became much more of a Remainer central operation. The other thing is, bear in mind that in London, all you hear is the Remainer echo chamber. And so what passes for being impartial, you see all this argument about civil service being impartial, what passes for being impartial is just the median point of that echo chamber. It's not impartial at all. You go and say those things in Yorkshire, you get you get an eyebrow cocked at you, so what are you talking about, you know? So the acceptance of the sort of metropolitan view, the London view, the global view. I mean, London's a global city. It's much more than it's a UK city in many ways. And it's a perfectly reasonable point of view from some perspectives, but it doesn't give you any answers at all about Brexit. It does not comprehend what Brexit was about for most of the people of this country. And that was about returning to our traditions as a global power, soft power these days, a global intellectual power, if you like, a global power of persuasion. We have those things in a way that almost no other country does, for reasons you and I can't claim any credit for it, because it all happened with our ancestors. The English language, the rule of law, our democracy. These things which actually many people in Europe are mildly jealous of. They'd like to emulate. I make a point always of never attacking officials either by name or individually. And there's a reason for that. They're not in a position to defend themselves. It's our job to carry the can for these things, whether it's our fault or not, you know. That's just been the way of the British system. Now, the blind side, well, of course I was. I mean, the simple truth is, read my resignation letter. You know, on the Sunday before I resigned, I was not aware of what the Prime Minister wanted to put in the White Paper. The White Paper that I was supposed to be writing, we had written a version of it, and she changed the critical chapters. So on the Monday, I said, that won't work. I said, as I always do when I didn't agree with it, I said, let me try and rewrite it to make it work. Because part of my job is to find out what would get through the House, you know. And Wednesday we got a copy, we rewrote it very quickly for her, and they turned it down. So, truth be told, I knew on Wednesday that I would resign. But on the occasions that I've had to resign, a couple of times in my career, I've always been careful to control the timing, control the media, do it in a way which gets the right message across. So that's what I did. But yes, of course, it was, well, let me say, put it very mildly, unusual as a way to treat a Secretary of State in his own responsibility. You know, the fact that Mr. Cummings doesn't like me is something which is 10 years old. It's not new. Well, I was chairman when he first came into the party on Ian Duncan Smith's watch, and I wouldn't let him do a lot of things which he wanted to do, and many of them were quite daft. So that was simple as that, really. But it's very old news. The simple truth is, Boris has got to choose his own advisors and his own ministers, and give them the proper responsibility for what they do. If you take responsibility away from cabinet ministers, you weaken government generally. That's the truth. But there's no sign of that happening. I don't see cabinet ministers having their policies dictated to them as it stands, and so collective responsibility will continue to apply. The final fracture in the Theresa May period of government was when cabinet ministers collectively broke collective responsibility. It may sound odd, but they basically no longer supported the government line publicly. That was the first time in 100 years of British parliamentary history and British constitution that had happened. That's the outcome of not trusting your ministers properly and not binding your ministers in by consulting them in the first place. And that's much more important than who this or that civil servant or special advisor is. That's down to the Prime Minister's preferred style. There was undoubtedly a degree of cooperation between the Commission and, as it were, the Remainers in both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And the Commission was always hoping that our negotiating position would be undermined, and it very often was. I mean, look, Keir Starmer's probably about to lead the Labour Party. He actively set out to try and expose all of our analysis of the negotiations. If you and I are negotiating over buying a house or a company or whatever, and you've got details about what you do and don't want, I'm going to get the maximum possible price out of you, aren't I, if I'm selling you the house, or if I know that perhaps, the other deals you had in mind won't work or whatever, I'm going to get a bigger price out of you. And that's what they were trying to do. That's the minimum they were trying to do. But also others were literally trying to get us to lay out our next stage of negotiating strategy. Well, that's bonkers. You don't say, if they say this, I'll do that. If they say this, I'll do that. They can then pick and choose what they want from your responses. So that has gone. That's broadly gone. Even Starmer, committed European as he is, will not be daft enough to try that line anymore. And if he does, we've got an 80 majority to deal with it. So yes, it is more advantageous either than the post-election Theresa May, or indeed the pre-election Theresa May, because she only had a majority of a dozen or so, and bear in mind, less than half of the parliamentary party voted Brexit. Less than half, So, there was always that weakness, and that's gone. And all the more reason for Boris to be robust, as he is, about the negotiating strategy. There's one other element which was apparent to me when I was Brexit Secretary, but which is now, I think, more apparent to everybody. There were a number of studies done on the continent about what the economic impact of a, quotes, hard Brexit was. They never really specified what a hard Brexit was, but a hard Brexit. And maybe a no-deal Brexit or something like that. And there's one of them by the Haller Institute, which I always quote because I can remember the numbers. But in essence, they said, well, 400,000 jobs in Europe will be at risk, Europe in total, in the event of a hard Brexit. 12,000 of them in Britain, the rest on the continent. That's the sort of ratio, 100,000 in Germany, 50,000 in France, 30-odd thousand in Poland and in Spain, 20,000 or so in Belgium and the Netherlands, and so on. What that tells you, it's not what will actually happen, because I always think these forecasts are nonsense, but it tells you what they think might happen. And if they think that they're going to lose vast numbers of jobs, then they're going to avoid that outcome at all costs. Now, that was then. The second issue is that over the last year or two, the comparative performance, economic performance of Britain and the continent has gone like this. Britain going up and the continent going down. The third thing, which never got aired because the Treasury was really Remainer central in this exercise, is that actually Europe is financially fragile. You've got big banks like Deutsche Bank and others, a number of others, which are risky options. They could go down. Now, nobody wants them to, and we'll do it. We've done lots and lots to protect some of these banks ourselves, because it doesn't suit us. But the real harm, if the Eurozone has a financial collapse, will be in the Eurozone, not here. Now what might trigger it? All sorts of things. I mean, coronavirus might do harm. Who knows? Or the global downturn that follows on from it might do harm. Who knows? But the simple truth is that their comparative economic position and ours are much more in our favour than anybody was willing to accept a year or two ago. Even though I kept saying it, nobody paid any attention. Now and that's more obvious now. And that's another effect of the majority in the House, I think, that now there's no longer that Remain majority in the House. You don't get the amplification of the mad view that somehow we are in a craven position with respect to Europe.